Good morning. Welcome to the March 4th, 2025 Board of Directors meeting for the Desert Water Agency. And just some few housekeeping items for those of us that are participating remotely. If you could mute your microphone until you are ready to speak during public comment or otherwise. And for those of us in the room, also please mute your electronic devices. Members of the public may participate by being present here with us in the boardroom today or remotely with the information that is found on the agenda that was posted last Thursday. For discussion and questions, I will call on directors in the following roll call order: Director Gracia, Director McKenna, Secretary Treasurer Bloomer, Vice President Bowman, and President Ortega. And all votes will be conducted via roll call. And with that, if I could ask Director Gracia to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Next, we can move to item 3, which is our roll call. And Ms. Hoffman, would you mind?
Director Gracia,
Present.
Director McKenna,
Present.
Secretary Treasurer Bloomer,
Present.
Vice President Bowman,
Here.
and President Ortega.
Present.
All present.
Thank you. Item 4 would be public comments on items not on today's agenda. Members of the public may comment on any item not listed on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Desert Water Agency. The speakers are requested to keep their comments to no more than 3 minutes. And as provided in the Brown Act, the board is prohibited from acting on items that are not listed on today's agenda. Ms. Hoffman, have we received any public comments?
None have been received.
Okay. Do we have members of the public who would like to speak this morning, either here in the room or attending virtually? Seeing none, we'll move to item 5. Similarly, although this would be public comments for items that are on today's agenda, again, we ask to keep the comments to 3 minutes. Have we received any public comments for items listed on today's agenda?
None have been received.
Okay, thank you. And seeing no members of the public present or at the podium or raising their hand online, we can move to item 6, which is our consent calendar. Items that are listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by one motion of the board without discussion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a board member requests a specific item to be discussed and or removed from the consent calendar for separate action. Do we have any items on today's consent calendar that a director would like to pull for further discussion?
Nope.
Seeing none, I'll look for a motion, please.
Move the consent calendar.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. We have a first from Director Gracia, a second from Secretary Treasurer Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director McKenna,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer Bloomer,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 7, we have 2 action items today. The first is 7A, request board authorization for general manager to execute memorandum of understanding with Kern County Water Agency, and that would be Mr. Tate, please.
Thank you, President Ortega and members of the board. Today I have the request or authorization for the general manager to execute the memorandum of understanding with Kern County Water Agency. Kern County Water Agency is a participant in the Delta Conveyance Plan. Kern County serves as the local contracting entity for state water project and such as has 13 local districts called member units to supply state water project to. Some of the member units are agricultural users who typically finance water supply projects through revenue generated from crop sales. Since the agricultural member units users do not have taxing ability or ratepayers to spread the costs over, the near-term financial expenditures and long-term water supply benefits of the Delta Conveyance Plan present a financial burden. Agricultural member units have different advantages than municipal state water contractors, such as access to imported water during wet years and access to large tracts of land that could be used for groundwater banking. DWA and Kern County would like to enter into a non-binding MOU to cooperate over approximately 18 months to identify and evaluate possible arrangements for collaboration on water management to optimize the costs and benefits through possible transfers or exchanges of Table A allocations. The objective of the MOU is to reduce reliance on any one water source, diversify supplies and storage, and optimize state water supplies and groundwater banking opportunities. Kern County made the request to other state water contractors in addition to Desert Water Agency. Entering the MOU will ensure the Desert Water Agency has the opportunity to participate in discussions related to transferring water and water banking within Kern County Water Agency's jurisdiction. Kern County would like to enter a single MOU with participating state water contractors. The MOU has been distributed to all interested contractors. Kern County has requested comment for the preparation of the final MOU. The final version of the MOU will be subject to legal counsel and agency staff review. Fiscal impact. Entering into the MOU will have no fiscal impact for the agency if discussions resulting from the MOU result in a future program. The agency will have the opportunity to decide at a future date regarding the involvement of future financial impacts as a result. Finance Director Sines has reviewed this report. Legal counsel has reviewed the draft MOU. The final version of the MOU will be subject to legal review again. Recommendation. Staff recommends that the board authorize the general manager to execute the memorandum of understanding with Kern County Water Agency, subject to final review of agency staff and legal counsel. And we attached a draft copy. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Director Grasha, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions today. I think I understand it enough to go forward, but as time goes on and we get closer to a real decision, I'd like to take a few minutes and explore some of these things. So,
Okay, thank you. Director McKenna?
Yeah, I also note the non-binding nature of this memorandum. So, yeah, I'm in favor of this. Let's look into this.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Bloomer?
No questions, thanks.
Vice President Bowman?
I think it's brilliant that we are looking at other potential ways of mitigating presence or lack thereof of water. So thank you.
Thank you. And I have no questions, so I'll look for a motion.
I so move.
I'll second.
All right, I have a first from Vice President Bowman and a second from Secretary Treasurer Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote?
Director Grasha,
aye.
Director McKenna,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer Bloomer,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Action item 7B is request board authorization for general manager to execute memorandum of understanding for the 2027 5-year update of the Mission Creek Subbasin. And Ms. Rapola, I think that's you today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Ortega and members of the board. Today's staff is requesting authorization for our general manager to execute the memorandum of understanding for the second 5-year update. So this is the 2027 update to our alternative plan for the Mission Creek Subbasin. So just a little bit of background on this effort. In December of 2016, agencies in the Mission Creek Subbasin submitted an alternative plan along with a bridge document that explained how that plan met the requirements of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. In July of 2019, the Department of Water Resources notified Desert Water Agency and the other agencies that our alternative plan did in fact meet the objectives of SGMA and was therefore approved. So part of the requirements under SGMA for these plans is that we submit annual reports, which is essentially a year-end review for the subbasin. Those are due by April 1st of each year. And we have submitted those annual reports in 2018 through 2024. But one of the other requirements under SGMA is that we take a look at our alternative plan as a whole every 5 years, how we're doing, if anything new has come up, if we identify any new projects or management actions that we need to potentially add to our plan. Again, that's done every 5 years. So the last time we did this, we submitted our plan or our first update in January 1 or by January 1 of 2022. The time has come for our second 5-year update, and that will be due by January 1 of 2027. So we're looking to kickstart that effort right now. The memorandum of understanding that's before you today is really meant to be a cost share agreement. So it memorializes the intent of the 3 agencies that are involved in this process. That includes Coachella Valley Water District, Desert Water Agency, those are the 2 GSAs in the Mission Creek Subbasin, and the 3rd agency is Mission Springs Water District. So the 3 of us work together as the Mission Creek Subbasin Management Committee. The consulting team that is the current on-call consultant for the Mission Creek Subbasin is WSP. Their current agreement for on-call consulting services has a term from September 25th of 2024 through September 24th of 2026. So WSP submitted a proposal for the work necessary to prepare and submit this 5-year update. The total cost of their proposal was $963,408. And the way the MOU works is that the 3 agencies split that cost equally. So each one of us would be responsible for 1/3 of that cost. In terms of prior actions taken on this effort, in October of 2019, the board did authorize our general manager to execute an MOU for that first 5-year update. Fiscal impact, this effort will hit a total of 3 of our fiscal year budgets, including the current one. We have included approved funds in the current budget to kind of kickstart the effort here, so the beginning portions of that work. As I stated, the total cost for the full effort is $963,408, so DWA's share of that would be 1/3 of the total, or approximately $321,136. I have broken down here under the fiscal impact section what we anticipate seeing in each of the 3 fiscal years, including current. This is just an estimate. It's based on the project schedule that was provided by WSP. So in the current year, we're looking at around $33,000. The bulk of the cost will be felt in the coming fiscal year of 25-26. Around $221,000 is what we would expect to see. And then the tail end of the effort will hit that 26-27 fiscal year budget to the tune of around $67,000. Finance Director Science has reviewed this report. There was no legal review. And staff is recommending that the board authorize the general manager to execute the memorandum of understanding for preparation and submission of the 2027 5-year update to the Mission Creek Subbasin Alternative Plan between CVWD, DWA, and Mission Springs Water District. And I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Director Grasha, questions?
The price is too high. Can you explain to me why the price is $1 million to update a document that's been in existence for, I don't know how many years, but a lot? Any,
I personally do not have the detail on the price and how it was arrived at and what it includes. What I can tell you is those costs have been budgeted for this current fiscal year, knowing that it takes this type of funds to update these reports. We did insert that an amount for this fiscal year that is enough to cover this year's and will be a part of our planning going forward for the future budgets as well. For any future further details, it would have to be, I would need to defer that back to Ms. Rapola.
and the funding will come from, I'm assuming, the tax that's collected on the properties in the Mission Creek?
So the source of funding would not be the state water project tax.
Okay.
That this is actually in the realm of where our general purpose tax
Oh.
covers. So we have, which is an unrestricted source of funds.
It's too much money. I don't know how, we don't have enough information, in my view, to just say, okay, that must be how much it costs, because I can assure you, it doesn't cost this much to prepare this report. So without the board being able to dig further into this, I don't even have a plan on how you could dig and find out what the real value of the state requires it, okay. But $1 million? No, no. So I'll leave it to you guys to decide.
Director
I will
McCann-
say,
oh,
just,
sorry.
just in response to
Mhm.
your comments, sir, that it is consistent with prior efforts in terms of the overall cost. It's based on the number of hours involved. So what the consultants have to do is update the groundwater flow model. So they have to take all of the information for the last 5 years. They have to incorporate it into this model. They have to update the model. They're working with several different agencies on this effort. But there is a cost proposal or cost schedule involved that would explain this price. And I'm happy to provide that for you if you'd like to see it.
Well, let me ask this, if you don't mind. So, this consultant, was it the same consultant we used the prior year? We own the data that they created, right? And whoever the consultant was the last time we went through this?
I believe this is the same consultant. It's a different name,
Okay.
but it's the same
Company.
consulting firm. It is a 5-year plan update, so they are looking at those 5 years. You know, it's not that routine annual update that is what happened that past year. Here's the data, and which is a fairly straightforward report. This is, I would compare it to recreating the report utilizing the 5-year information that they have, and they're going to be starting it this year. So it takes it at least 2 years to put the report together. That's why that cost seems so high. You should think of it as breaking it up into at least 2 years worth of value.
But they're not testing any water, they're not building any structures, they're not drilling any wells, monitoring wells. They're just regurgitating last year's data in a new.
They're taking the past history of data and rerunning the models and so
Right.
forth. And
Somebody's got a sweet deal, and I don't know who they are. I'd like to know how that happens. That's too much money. But I'm repeating myself now. Thank you.
All right, Director McKenna?
I have a couple of questions. And the first one is really just to give me context. Why is this known as an alternative plan?
Agencies that don't have an existing plan to manage groundwater sustainability in the basin would basically have to come up with a plan from scratch. That's known as a groundwater sustainability plan. If a basin such as ours has an existing plan that already achieves that, then you can utilize that existing plan and submit it in lieu of creating essentially a brand new plan from scratch. So that's what we've done.
That's correct.
We have a plan that proves that we're sustainably managing our groundwater aquifer. Let's use the plan we have. And then that bridge document is really what's meant to explain that this is our existing plan. This is how it meets the requirements of SIGMA. This is why we think this plan is sufficient.
That helps. So how did they come up with this three-way split? Coachella Valley is a much bigger organization than we are, but they don't have much involvement in Mission Creek subbasin. Mission Springs is smaller than we are and has a big involvement in that subbasin. So what was used to determine this equal split between the three of us?
I suspect it was, all three agencies looked at it as it affects us all in one aspect of a report. If we had to do it ourselves, we would bear the brunt of that report. Or if Mission Springs had to do just one report, they would bear that brunt. So it's my understanding that the three agencies looked at this as we're all receiving the same benefit from this report. Therefore, we would split the cost in three ways, since it's a basin-wide plan. And it benefits the entire basin. And we are the three agencies that are responsible for that basin. As far as the GSAs are responsible for groundwater management, Mission Springs is responsible, of course, for their their customers for serving that water, but they are a part of the groundwater management committee that was formed. Therefore, that's my understanding of why it was based on just a three-way split, 1/3.
Was it the result of an RFP? Was this bid? This work?
It was.
Yes.
So there was a request for proposals sent out for this work. One bid was received. So it was sent out to multiple consulting companies, but one bid was received. It was reviewed for consistency with prior efforts, typical inflation rates and whatnot, and deemed to be a reasonable.
Okay, thanks.
And I will add to that the cost share for the Indio subbasin is done in a very similar way. There's just 4 agencies instead of 3, so it's split 4 ways.
Okay.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Bloomer.
One comment, and I think if somebody did, and it's probably why they didn't submit RFPs, because they would basically kind of have to start from scratch with what they've been doing. So, and I think we paid similar for the last plan update, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And I believe we've been cost sharing equal on previous plans before, like Southern Nutrient Management Plan and the different plans
That's
before
correct.
this, correct?
That is
So it's
correct.
been an agreement with that management team. So anyways, I'm in favor of it.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman.
I remember the history a little bit when SIGMA was coming down upon the districts. We could take what they said, or we could create our own alternative plan. And that's what we find here. And it was kind of confusing, if I remember right. How do we go? What do we go? And the 3 agencies bound together to create this, to save everybody and to protect and to control our water. That's what I recall. And I'm in favor of it.
Okay. For clarification, just following on what Vice President Bowman said, we already had a plan before we were required to submit one. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah, that's what the alternate plan is.
That is the alternative
Yeah,
plan.
so we had a requirement to submit one for 2022, but in fact, we've been working on a plan for quite a while.
Yes.
And that's where I think the alternate name sort of comes from, because we had something in place as the three agencies. And then, oh, by the way, we also have this reporting requirement for the state. This is what we already have, and it was accepted.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And that's similar for the Indio Subbasin as well.
That is correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. So when you'll be coming back to us, I suppose, for the mission, I'm sorry, for the Indio Subbasin, or is the timing different?
I would say that it's a different subbasin and a different set of agreements. So there's actually an MOU that's already in place for the Indio subbasin that's in perpetuity. So
Oh.
we have said that, yes, as these come up, we will share cost for each of these efforts. And that was submitted some time ago and approved by the board.
That's correct.
So we'll never see that again.
Happy to provide it.
No,
for you,
I
but
mean,
yes, that
I'm
is
not
something that
asking to
was
see it
prior.
again. It's just not something that's on a schedule like this one would be.
Correct,
Mhm.
because it's again, a different set of agencies, a different mechanism they agreed to do one in perpetuity. So what you're going to see for that effort is really just updates. This is what we received, this is the cost, this is what it looks like.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, so I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to authorize the general manager to execute the memorandum of understanding for the 2027 five-year update to the alternative plan.
Thank you. I'll look for a second.
I'll second that.
All right. I have a first from Secretary Treasurer Bloomer and a second from Vice President Bowman. May we have a roll call vote, please?
No.
Director Gracia? Sorry.
I think you responded, yes.
Director McKenna?
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer Bloomer?
Aye.
Vice President Bowman?
Aye.
And President Ortega?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Right, so we can move to our discussion items, and again, we have two. The first is 8A, progress update for the Coachella Valley Salt and Nutrient Management Plan. And once again, here you are.
I am here, I'm already here.
Thank you.
So thank you, President Ortega, members of the board. Just a little bit of background on the Coachella Valley Salt Nutrient Management Plan effort that we are currently undertaking. The California Recycled Water Policy, which was adopted in 2009, amended in 2018, recognizes that the use of recycled water as an alternative water supply is a good thing, but it also recognizes that using recycled water does have the potential to add salts and nutrients to groundwater. So in an effort to address this, the policy requires that salt and nutrient loading to groundwater basins in the state of California be managed on a basin-wide or watershed-wide scale through the implementation of salt and nutrient management plans, or S&MPs. So these S&MPs are required to be submitted to the Regional Water Quality Board having jurisdiction. In our case, that is the Colorado River Basin Regional Water Quality Control Board. In 2015, a Coachella Valley Salt Nutrient Management Plan, or CVS&MP, was submitted to the regional board. The board staff provided comments on our initial plan and also provided recommendations for ways to improve on it, if you will, and to put together a CVS&MP that would be acceptable per the 2018 recycled water policy. As a result of these comments, all of the groups in the valley came together, the agencies, and in July of 2020, 8 water and wastewater agencies throughout the Coachella Valley contracted with Wildermuth Environmental, which is now known as West Yost, to put together a CVS&MP work plan, which serves as the framework for the effort that we're doing right now, which is preparing that final plan. Part of that work plan also involved preparing a groundwater monitoring program work plan. The groundwater monitoring program work plan was submitted to the regional board, that should say, my apologies, in December of 2020 and approved in February of 2021. The final CVS&MP work plan was submitted to the regional board in April of 21 and approved in October of 21. Now that we had 2 approved work plans, we issued, or CV issued, in January of 2022, a request for proposal to prepare that final CVS&MP that would be submitted to the regional board. In February of 2022, West Yost was selected as the consultant to develop that final plan, and work on this effort began in July of 2022. We do expect to see the final CVS&MP completed in March of 2027, so this is a multi-year effort that we're just about, I would say, a little more than halfway through at this point. In terms of prior actions on this effort, in December of 2020, the board did authorize the general manager to execute an MOU for collaboration on that CVS&MP work plan. And in June of 22, the board authorized the general manager to execute the first supplement to the MOU to develop that final plan. Next slide, please. Oh, that's me. Thank you. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to share with you just a high-level overview of the CVS&MP effort to date. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to go over just a little bit of background and objectives for developing this CVS&MP. We'll go over some of the tasks that have already been completed, as well as the tasks that we're working on currently. And then we'll talk about what we've got coming up next in this process. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but the CVS&MP, what is it? Why are we doing this? So as I stated, that recycled water policy encourages using recycled water, but recognizes that it can add salts and nutrients. The policy also requires that we develop this CVS&MP or this S&MP. Now, agencies can develop their own. They can develop a basin-wide. We're working together as an entire basin. All of the Coachella Valley Groundwater Basin is working together to develop this CVS&MP. And the other reason for doing a plan like this is to ensure that we're protecting our beneficial uses of groundwater in the basin, so the different ways that we're using this water. So this is a picture of the Coachella Valley Groundwater Basin. This is the area that is the focus of this effort. If you were looking at this in terms of sigma, you've got 3 subbasins included here. So you have the Desert Hot Springs subbasin on the top edge, if you will. The Mission Creek subbasin is in the middle, in between the San Andreas Fault and the Banning Fault, and then you've got the Indio subbasin on the bottom side of this. So all of those subbasins collectively represent that full Coachella Valley Groundwater Basin. Some of the objectives for developing this CVS&MP include not only managing salt and nutrient loading, but doing it in a way that makes sense for our community. So we're taking a look at the Coachella Valley specifically, right? What's going on here? What type of loading sources do we see in the valley? What types of beneficial uses do we see occurring in the valley? Are they the same across the entire valley, or do they change, right, from one end to the other? Another objective would be to preserve long-term sustainable and affordable use of groundwater. So there are a lot of different mechanisms to manage salt and nutrient loading. Not all of them are affordable. So there is, first let's identify what those mechanisms are, but then let's look at the cost associated and really determine at the end of this effort what makes the most sense for our basin. And then, of course, to protect those beneficial uses of groundwater, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. So who's involved in this process? The answer is a whole lot of people, a lot of different groups. At the center of this effort is our consulting team. So we have our West Yost team. We also have a legal and regulatory specialist, Tess Dunham, and an outreach and stakeholder engagement specialist, Megan Wiley. So all those folks together make up our consulting team. They are the ones ultimately preparing this plan. They're coordinating any and every public workshop that we have, our steering committee meetings, our technical advisory committee meetings, so they're really doing the bulk of that work. Our steering committee is composed of 8 water and wastewater agencies throughout the Coachella Valley. So that includes CVWD, DWA, Indio Water Authority, Mission Springs Water District, Coachella Water Authority, City of Palm Springs, Valley Sanitary District, and Myoma Dunes Mutual Water Company. So all of those agencies are involved in this effort. Our technical advisory committee is composed of our Sigma consultants for the Indio Subbasin, which is Todd Groundwater, our Sigma consultants for the Mission Creek Subbasin, WSP, as well as a third independent consultant who's not necessarily familiar with the Coachella Valley, but they're familiar with this SNMP process in the Central Valley. So they bring an outsider's perspective, but one that's very familiar with this process. We have our other salt nutrient contributors in the area, which include our golf industry and our agricultural industry. So we do work with those folks a lot, especially when we need specific information relative to the types of crops we grow, nitrogen uptake by turf and grass, and the type of fertilizer applied. So we really do work with them a lot on this process. We keep our tribal governments informed. So there is a standing item at our quarterly Sigma tribal workshop meetings where we update them on this process. And then they also have the opportunity to submit written comments during our public review periods. The regional board is really kept in the loop throughout this process, and that's done on purpose because we want to get feedback from them as we're going along, as we're developing each individual task, right? We want their input. We don't want to wait until the end and then say, here's the plan. Because the whole point of this is to prepare a plan that is going to be accepted. So our consulting team updates them on a regular basis, both by virtual and as well as in-person meetings, and they do also provide the occasional presentation like you're seeing today at the regional board meetings. I did one earlier this month. And then we have, last but certainly not least, the other stakeholders, which are our general public. So that's anyone that has an interest in this process. We have public workshops scattered throughout this 5-year period where we talk about the different tasks that we are working on, get public feedback, and then they also have an opportunity to provide written comments on each of these tasks during the public review period. So what does the workflow look like for this process? When it says TM, what a TM is it's a technical memo, and it's really that written document that describes each of the tasks that are involved in this process. So when our consulting team initially prepares a TM, they do so with initial input from the steering committee, so that's those water and wastewater agencies. They may get additional input from golf or ag if it's a task that specifically involves, as I said, salinity thresholds or crops or something like that. They'll take that input, they'll prepare an administrative draft technical memo or TM, they'll present that to our technical advisory committee or our TAC for input on the technical side of things. Any input, I'll also state that the regional board is welcome to attend any of those TAC meetings and provide verbal comments at that time. So another opportunity for the regional board to be involved in the process. Any input provided by the TAC is used to update the technical memo. A draft is prepared and released, and that's where that public comment period comes in. Usually that's around 30 days for a given task. Again, tribal governments, regional board, general public, anyone can provide written comments during those public comment periods. And then any and all comments that are received on those TMs during the review period is taken into account. The technical memos are updated to incorporate those comments. They provide responses to every single comment they get. And then they prepare that final technical memo, and that's posted to the website for the CVS and MP effort, which I'll have up at the end of this presentation. So this is our project timeline. Hopefully you can see it. It's a little hard for me to see it, but I think you guys have a better screen than me. So as you can see, this process has been going for a while. We started work on this in July of 22. We expect that final plan to be completed in March of 27. Some of these tasks have been completed already. Some of them we're in process with. But we'll go over each of these tasks briefly here before taking a little bit of a deeper dive. Task 1, which is completed, involved characterizing nitrate and TDS loading, TDS being total dissolved solids, that represents your salts, nitrate represents your nutrients, but characterizing loading to the basin. So where is this happening, right? What are our sources of loading? Task 2 is characterizing our groundwater quality in the basin. So we're looking at recent historic quality. We're also looking at our current water quality. So this is our starting point to help us forecast into the future. Task 3 is delineating draft management zones and describing metrics to characterize beneficial use protection. So here we're taking the big basin, right, that full groundwater basin, and we're breaking it apart into smaller subunits that we can manage more effectively based on what's happening within that given area. And then assigning those beneficial use protection metrics is really, let's identify what beneficial uses are occurring, what those thresholds should be. Task 4 is developing a technical approach for forecasting nitrate and TDS loading to groundwater. So this is really how our consulting team is going to go about constructing a forecasting tool. So this is what's going to allow us to take the information about what our groundwater quality looks like currently and forecast that using this tool into the future. What do we expect our concentrations of TDS and nitrate to be in the future? Task 5 includes physically constructing that forecasting tool. So now we have all the basic information that we need as our starting point. Let's build this tool, right? Once we have the tool built, let's evaluate our baseline scenario. So that is really everything that we're doing right now, as well as everything that we have planned. So what's in our general plan already, right? Projects that we are already planning on constructing, efforts that we're already planning on participating in. So that's our baseline scenario. Once we've done that, task 6 would involve forecasting nitrate and TDS loading for up to 8 additional scenarios. So once we have evaluated our baseline scenario, if we see a need to develop additional scenarios, implement mitigation efforts or management strategies, that's where that would come in. Task 7 involves taking all of those baseline scenarios and potential additional strategies or scenarios and attaching a cost to each one of those. So this is where we really start to look at the affordability of all of these different options compared to each other. And then that final task is taking all of the information that we have learned in tasks 1 through 7 and putting together that final salt nutrient management plan to submit to the regional board. So here's where each one of those tasks sits right now. We have completed task 1. Technical memo 1 is posted to the website, so it's available for view. TM2 or task 2 for characterizing quality is also complete, available on the website. We are in the process of completing TM number 3 for drafting those management zones and identifying the metrics for beneficial use protection. They're about 75% of the way done with that. Task 4 for developing the technical approach for that forecasting tool is also complete, available on the website. They are about 40% of the way done with constructing the tool. So they are actively working on building that tool so that we can evaluate our baseline scenario. Task 6 is really dependent on task 5 because we won't know if we need additional scenarios until we have fully evaluated the baseline scenario. So once we are about complete with task 5, that's when we'll start task 6. And similarly with task 7, really dependent on the results of task 5 and 6. So now we'll go through each one of those tasks in just a little bit more detail. We're not going to get too knee deep in the weeds, but I do want to give you an idea of what's involved with each one of these tasks. Task 1 for characterizing nitrate and TDS loading to the basin. Again, here we were looking at where this is happening throughout the basin. Where are we seeing loading occur throughout that groundwater basin? Once we know where it's happening, we need to know what's happening. So what type of activity is taking place at each one of these loading sources? Is there any sort of seasonal variability, occurring with the source? Are we seeing more loading happening in the winter and less in the summer, or vice versa? Or is it a fairly constant source of loading throughout the year? And not only year to year, but over time. Is there any sort of trend that we're seeing with this particular source? Is the loading increasing over time? Is it decreasing, or is it staying fairly consistent? The information gleaned from this task is currently being used to delineate those groundwater management zones because, again, we're taking the large basin and breaking it down into smaller units based on a number of different factors, including what's happening in different areas of the basin. We're also using and will be using the results of this task to inform our model. So when we're doing our forecasting, we're evaluating our baseline scenario and our potentially additional scenarios. We're going to use this information as really our input, right? This is our starting point. These are where we know our loading sources are occurring. As you can see, this is a completed task. You can see kind of the timeline of when we released the draft, when the review period was, and when we posted the final TM to the website. Okay, so this is one of the figures that you'll see in TM number 1 for loading sources to the basin. Color-coded figure really meant to represent all of the different types of loading sources and where they're located. So the red areas, there's not very many of them, but those are wastewater percolation ponds. So this is where our wastewater treatment facilities will be located throughout the basin. The areas outlined in purple are areas where non-potable water is being used. So it could be recycled water, it could be canal water that's used for irrigation, but you can see where that's happening throughout the basin. The tannish brown colored areas are potential septic areas. So these may be developed, they may not be developed, but they are not directly adjacent to a sanitary sewer system. So if they are developed, likely on septic. If they will potentially be developed in the future, also likely on septic until a sewer system is developed. And then we've got our groundwater replenishment facilities. I know you guys are familiar with those. So we've got Mission Creek GRF at the top, GRF being groundwater replenishment facility, whitewater spreading basins also. We have the Palm Desert groundwater replenishment facility, as well as the Thomas E. Levy groundwater replenishment facility. And then the big area in blue is really areas of return flow. So that is where they are taking water, they are applying it to the ground surface for irrigation purposes. Some of that water might be used up by crops, by grass, whatnot, but not all of it is going to be used up. Some of that might make it past the root zone and eventually work its way back down into the aquifer. And that return flow water might have higher levels of salts and nutrients. So that's why we want to capture where this is happening. Golf courses, as we know, they apply fertilizer to keep their grasses green. They do a lot of irrigating. So again, other potential sources of loading. And then irrigated agricultural lands, which as we know is happening more on the east end of the valley, but that's that area in green that you can see at the bottom of the map. And feel free to stop me if you guys have any questions as we go along, because I'll just keep rambling otherwise. So that's task 1 in a nutshell. Again, that TM is available on the website. So if you guys want to take a deeper dive into that task, look at more of the figures, get specific information on individual sources of loading, all that information is going to be available in that TM. Moving on to task 2, this involves characterizing groundwater quality. So here we're looking at recent historic quality, as well as what we consider our current groundwater quality. This is relative to the TDS, or total dissolved solids, and nitrate concentrations. And this information is based on actual data that we have as agencies from the various wells that we have in our area. So it's historical water sampling all the way up to current, and that's what they're using to characterize the water quality in the basin. Information from this task, again, is currently being used to delineate those management zones, because not only are we looking at what's happening, we're looking at if there are any similarities in water quality based on what's happening. And it does, again, provide initial conditions to input into the forecasting model. That's going to help us kind of have that starting point of here's where we are now. Let's use this information to forecast into the future. This task will also help support recommendations for TDS objectives that would potentially be adopted into a basin plan amendment. Again, we know where we're at now. We know what our water quality looks like now. As we move forward in this process and we learn more, we will be able to use this information to help make those recommendations. And it also helps support the assessment of assimilative capacity. So what the assimilative capacity is it's the difference between the beneficial use thresholds and that concentration that are assigned for each type of use and the current groundwater quality. So what's the difference between those two concentrations? And that is theoretically the amount of additional loading that can take place, salts and nutrient loading to the basin, without impairing that beneficial use. This task is also complete. So you can see the draft was released sometime in October of '24. Review period was November to December of '24, and we posted that final TM to the project website earlier this year. So I have a couple figures here for you. The first figure is really just meant to give you an idea of one of the ways that we characterize groundwater quality. So really we do this 3 different ways. We look at groundwater quality from a spatial perspective, so horizontally across the basin. We're also looking at groundwater quality vertically, okay? So we do recognize that concentrations may vary from the shallow aquifer to the deep aquifer. So we want to take a look at that vertical difference. We do have wells throughout the area that are screened in the shallow aquifer, so that allows us to get that sample data for the shallower areas of our aquifer. The majority of our production wells are screened in the deep aquifer. So the water that we're getting for our drinking water systems is coming from that blue area that you see on the right-hand side of the exhibit. But you can also see that there's a little bit of difference between the vertical stratification of the aquifers, even from the west end of the valley to the east end of the valley. So again, that's more information that will help us delineate those management zones, right? Kind of break them apart. So this is another figure that you might see in that technical memo. The map on the left-hand side is really that dot map that references specific TDS concentrations at individual wells in 2019, and this is in the deep aquifer. So here we're looking at that deeper section of the aquifer. We take that specific information from the left-hand side and we use it, or our consulting team, I should say, uses it to create a raster image as you see on the right-hand side. And really what this does is it provides an estimated, in this case, TDS concentration at any point in your aquifer. So we're taking the information that we have, which is on the left-hand side, and we are creating this map that estimates concentration everywhere. So it gives you an idea of what the aquifer as a whole looks like. Again, technical memo 2 is completed. It's on the website. So if you would like additional information or you want to take that deeper dive into the groundwater quality, that is available to review. Moving on to task 3, this is where we take that information from task 1 and 2 and we take the large Coachella Valley groundwater basin, break it apart into smaller subunits. So we do this by looking at the different areas. We look at the depths or the stratification of the aquifer throughout the aquifer, if there's any differences. We look at the different types of beneficial uses that are occurring throughout our basin. And then we also, as part of this task, are identifying and assigning beneficial use thresholds for TDS, for nitrate, based on the different types of uses that we're seeing happen here in the basin. The metrics for characterizing reasonable beneficial use, essentially we're establishing or estimating our ambient concentrations, which is what our concentrations look like right now, in each of the management zones that we've delineated. And then again, we compare that ambient or current concentration against the beneficial use thresholds that we've identified. This is a process or a task that is actively in process right now, so it's not done. But we do expect to see the draft released here in the very near future, so early 2025. Typical review period for a task is 30 days, so we do expect to see a public review period of about 30 days once this task is released. Just to go over some of the components that we look at when deciding how we're going to delineate these draft management zones. We'll look at the hydrogeology in the basin. We'll look at where groundwater recharge is happening throughout the basin, how water is flowing from one end to the other, and then where we're taking water back out of the ground, right? This is mainly our wells where we're pumping groundwater. We're looking at, again, those sources of loading. We're looking at our current concentrations in groundwater, if there's any similarities in different areas. We're looking at existing as well as any potential future beneficial uses of groundwater that might be happening in different areas. And then locations for hydrologically vulnerable areas identified by gamma. This is really the entire basin. So this is our first stab, if you will, at the groundwater management zones. The area in pink is the Desert Hot Springs, GMZ we call them. This is really separated by the rest of the basin by that San Andreas Fault, so it acts as a barrier to groundwater flow. Makes sense to have this as a zone. The Mission Creek GMZ, you can see up there in kind of the seafoam green color, sandwiched in between the Mission Creek section of the San Andreas Fault and the Banning Fault. So again, those two fault lines act as barriers for groundwater flow. The Indio subbasin on the bottom half that you see in orange and yellow is one subbasin in terms of sigma, but there's a lot of different things happening in that basin as you go from the west end to the east end. On the west side, which is that area in orange, we've designated it as Indio West, GMZ. You have mostly urban and golf course irrigation happening. So that's really what we see happening on the west side. Also, you have an unconfined aquifer, so the water is able to flow from the shallow part of the aquifer to the deep part of the aquifer. On the east side of the valley, which we've designated as Indio East, you've got kind of a shift happening, right? From mostly urban and golf course use to more agricultural use. So there's different types of beneficial uses that are going on in this part of the valley. The aquifer is also a little bit different. So they have a perched aquifer zone in the first 100 feet or so of the aquifer. That's the area that you see in the hashed line right there. That's where we see those tile drains for agriculture happening. You've got a shallow aquifer in the first couple 100 feet of that area. And then there's a clay layer that runs laterally across that area, and it kind of separates the shallow from the deep aquifer section. So again, different stratification of the aquifer happening on this end of the valley versus the west end of the valley. So here we've got Indio West, we have Indio East shallow, we have Indio East deep. So again, that's that shallow aquifer and that deep aquifer. And then we've got the Indio East perched. These are, again, the first draft, if you will. So we do expect to potentially change these a little bit as we learn more throughout this process. So you may very well see these change or be broken down even further as we go through. Beneficial use thresholds in the Coachella Valley groundwater basin as a whole. Really three main beneficial uses that we identify here in the valley. So we have municipal use. We've got that broken down into indoor and outdoor. So you've got your drinking water and your outdoor irrigation water. The total dissolved solid threshold that is assigned here for domestic is based on the secondary MCL range of 500 to 1,000 milligrams per liter. So just keep in mind that these beneficial use thresholds do not have to be one single number. They can be a range. The nitrate threshold for domestic beneficial use is 10 milligrams per liter. So that's your primary MCL for nitrate in drinking water. Outdoor and golf irrigation, that beneficial use has been assigned a TDS threshold of over 1,280, and that's based on salinity thresholds for turf. No nitrate threshold listed for outdoor. Industrial beneficial use has a TDS threshold of greater than 850 milligrams per liter, and no nitrate again for that one. And then our agricultural use is really the interesting one because you're going to see a really huge range here for TDS threshold. And that's actually based on all of the crops that we grow in this area. So this is really where we leaned on the information from the Coachella Valley Irrigated Lands Commission, or CVILC, to provide us with updated data on the crops that we're growing, on the salinity threshold for each one of those crops, and that based on the percent yield that you see. So that's why you have such a wide range, because we have a lot of different crops and they have a lot of different salinity thresholds. But again, it's important to know what's actually happening here in the valley, right? What crops are we actually growing? So these are not the final numbers that would be recommended to the board necessarily, but this is what we're using, if you will, to identify water use objectives for our regional board at the end of this process. So again, task 3 is in process, expected to release that draft here in the very near future. So look out for that, and I will try and keep you guys posted on when that actually gets released. Task 4 is complete. It's kind of a separate task in that they're just identifying or describing the approach that they're going to use to construct that forecasting tool. So a lot of technical information, equations and whatnot that are going to go into building that tool. But the point here, or the objective here, is to really describe the most efficient and appropriate approach to forecasting TDS and nitrate concentrations. And one of the ways we do this is by leveraging existing models. So for our Sigma efforts, we have existing mod flow groundwater models that have already been developed for the Indio subbasin and the Mission Creek subbasin. Our consulting team is taking advantage of that information that already exists. And they're using that groundwater model, really two separate models. They're going to combine it into one groundwater model. And then they're going to layer that groundwater flow model that they're constructing over the top of it. So again, utilizing information that we already have, that's efficient, and it's appropriate because it's already efforts that are going on in the valley. So we're being consistent with the information that we're using from one effort to the next. And then this effort or this approach is also meant to include the capability to produce defensible forecasts. So we can provide forecasted concentrations into the future, but we have to be able to back that up with sound information. So this map really just shows those two groundwater models that I talked about. For our Sigma efforts, the area in black is the boundary for that mod flow groundwater model in the Mission Creek subbasin. The area in red is the boundary for the Indio subbasin model. So again, they're going to take these two models, put it together into one model, and overlay that groundwater quality forecasting tool on top of that. The grid cells that you can see on here represent individual model cells. So each one of these squares is about 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet. Each one of these squares will have a water level assigned to it. Each one of these squares will have a water quality concentration, right? TDS and nitrate concentrations assigned to each individual cell. These cells talk to each other in the model. So that's how you start to see that water flow and that water quality change over time. It's a really interesting process and a lot of detail involved. So again, task 4 is complete. That one is also available on the website. So if you want to take a deeper dive, again, pretty technical TM, but if you want to take a look at it, it's in there. It's available for you. The tasks that we are either in process with or will be starting, we are currently working on task 5. Again, about 40% done with that. This is where we construct that forecasting tool. It's called MT3D. That's a groundwater model forecasting tool. Groundwater quality model forecasting tool. And we start evaluating that baseline scenario. So again, that's everything we're already doing. That's all of the planned projects and efforts that we already are planning to do. And we do anticipate this task being completed in early mid-2025, so around June. Once task 5 is about done, we will begin work on task 6, which again is identifying if there is a need for additional salt nutrient management plan scenarios. We're going to talk about this on the next slide, I promise, and it will make more sense to you. And then task 7 is taking all of those scenarios and attaching a cost and really comparing the cost of each alternative scenario to each other. So this graph is meant to represent a hypothetical baseline scenario. So this is something you might see as an output of our forecasting tool. Okay, so this does not represent our basin. This is just an example for you to give you kind of an idea of what we expect as a result from this forecasting that we're going to be doing. This particular graph is showing TDS concentrations over time. So on the vertical axis, you see increasing TDS concentration. On the horizontal axis, you see that time series from 2010, which is considered that recent historic, all the way out to 2100, the year 2100. So that's a really long time. The two green dots that you see would be known data, right? So that is the water levels that we already have information for. So again, that historic ambient is around 2010. The current ambient is around 2019, 2020. So that's what we will be considering current. The orangish colored line at the top of the graph is that beneficial use threshold. So you saw the numbers for the different types of use. We assign a beneficial use threshold based on everything that's happening in that zone, we assign a beneficial use threshold for that zone. So that's what this line represents at the top. The difference between that beneficial use threshold concentration and the ambient concentration or the current concentration is that vertical purple line that you see. So again, that's the available assimilative capacity. That's how much more loading could occur, in this case for TDS, to this zone, this area, without impairing that beneficial use threshold. The hatched green line that you see going across, that's those forecasted concentrations, right? So we've taken all the information that we know, we've taken all the inputs, put it into our model. Now we're forecasting out what we think our future concentrations might look like based on, in this case, it would be the baseline scenario, everything that we're doing or planning to do. In this particular hypothetical situation, you can see that there is a point around 2063 where our forecasted concentrations will exceed our beneficial use threshold. If we were to get a result like this, that's where we have to kind of go back to the drawing board, right? We have to say, okay, we know given everything we're doing or planning to do, there will come a point in time in the future where we will exceed our beneficial use threshold. We need to start thinking of those loading strategies, those management strategies. What strategies can we implement to control our loading and keep that hatched green line below the beneficial use threshold? So this is an example of maybe one of those S&MP scenarios that we come up with. We've identified that we need management strategies. We have, in this case, built in or implemented a very intensive, expensive mitigation, or not mitigation, but management strategy. And now we rerun the forecasting tool. We say, okay, let's plug this in. This is scenario one. Let's rerun this tool. We do that, and you can see now in this hypothetical scenario one that our hatched green line is staying below that beneficial use threshold. So whatever management strategy we put in here worked very effectively, as it seems. We're keeping well below that threshold. So this would be an example of scenario one. Again, in this case, it's definitely an intensive strategy, but it's also expensive. So this is why we need to develop a number of these different strategies, right? And then compare them against each other. So we're going to take each one of these scenarios, assign that cost, compare them to each other, and really come up with what we feel is the best scenario if needed. It could be that it's the baseline scenario, but we'll learn that as we go through the process more. So in closing, here is our website. Very easy to remember, www.cvsnmp.com. A lot of really useful information here. Again, all of those technical memos that are either in draft form or have been finalized are available under the resource section of this website. So you are welcome to take a look at those. A lot of information. The work plans are on there as well. Recycled water policy is on there as well. So really just a wealth of information. Recorded public meetings and workshops are on there. So if you want to watch the public workshops that have already taken place, you can do that here. They do keep this updated, that being our consultant team. Once they schedule dates for the next workshop or whatnot, they post that information here as well. So really just a useful tool to keep yourself up to date with the process as we go along. It is, again, a multi-year process. So very, very helpful. And at this time, I will open it up for any questions you might have. I know that was a lot of information, so thank you for sticking with me.
All right, thank you very much. Director Gracia.
Well, first of all, thank you for the report. I wished 6 years ago I had had the kind of education that you provided here today when I got on the board at Mission Springs. One of the things that crosses my mind when I listened to the report was paying for this is split again between the agencies, I guess. Is it evenly split, or?
I will look at that one and get back to you. I want to say it is, but I know we have several efforts going on. So I do have the.
It just occurred to me that by splitting like that, for instance, many of my constituents are paying twice. I'm not sure that that's a fair way to do them, to come up with a way of paying for this. I guess that's because we have two water districts in. At some point, we're going to have to take a look at ways to rectify that inequity. There are a multitude of ways to do that. Nobody that I can think of was going to want to probably approach that. Now, on here, on the, you had that arc where it goes off into an infinium. At some point, it wasn't long ago that 500 micrograms per liter was the state's limit. And at some point, that changed to 1,000. It wasn't the 70s when that happened. I think that was, so we're giving up, as customers, we're giving up the dream so that we can continue this expensive operations that takes to operate these water districts. The ratepayers in Mission Springs don't have a chance. It's just, my water tested over 400 micrograms per liter. It has since come down. I haven't quite figured out how they did that, but you're showing on the next page here where you're compressing that number at some point where it looks like it's going to be below 1,000 or whatever that top line is you've got there. Is that a hope or?
So again, this is hypothetical.
Right.
In no way at this point in time does this represent our basin. This is just to give you guys kind of a visual aid on what this process is going to look like and what those results might look like. What I will say is that the beneficial use thresholds that you see, there is no primary MCL for drinking water for TDS. There is a secondary MCL based on more aesthetics that is a range from 500 to 1,000. And because that's the information available, that's what they're using right now. When they determine a water quality objective for each of these zones, they will determine that number based on the different uses that are occurring, right? So is it majority urban water or urban use? Is it majority agriculture, right? And that's the whole point of separating the much larger basin into those smaller subunits. So we can start to kind of say, okay, this is really what's happening here in this area of the basin, right? It's mostly urban. You have an unstratified aquifer, so or unconfined aquifers. So this is information that we're going to learn as we go along. We're using the information that we have right now. As far as this scenario is concerned, they're going to look at really the whole range of options, if needed, for managing salts and nutrients, those different strategies. And they're going to have a really wide cost range, right? So you might have something that would be really effective, but it's going to be astronomical in cost. But we're going to look at all those options if needed, because we really want to select the best scenario for each one of these zones.
So the human body processes all this salt differently at different levels. I don't know if that's figured into your calculations, but having looked into that a little bit a long time ago, so it's something you have to remind yourself of, as you move along through this process. At the closer you get to 1,000, the more severe the health effects, and adding that much salt to your body is not a good habit to be in. So that's why this is so important. And as we go through this over a period of time, I get, I've heard President Powell say it before, and I guess, I just repeat that at some point we're just going to have to treat all the water and give up on the idea that we're going to have, in their area, they've lost from nitrates from the golf courses, I guess. I don't think they even have a well operating anymore in Indian Wells because of the nitrate level. So these are all things that, good luck. I hope I'm here when you figure it out. Thank you.
Director McKenna?
Yes, this is, it makes you wonder, really, if we did nothing, we do what we do now. In 2063, we'd all have to pack up and leave. It's just, this is so necessary that we stay on this and get this, find a scenario that works and get it done. Thanks. Thanks for the great work.
Secretary Treasurer Bloomer?
I don't have any questions. Thank you for the presentation and update. I'll check out the website when I need some sleeping material.
Vice President Bowman?
Yes, thank you for the presentation and all the detail. I'm appreciative of the fact that all the districts are involved and that there's not just one district or we're all concerned for the valley. So thank you.
Thank you. Couple of questions, and just to follow up on what Vice President Bowman said. I mean, this is obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, in my mind, there's a really good reason for all agencies to be involved because this impacts the entire source of where our drinking water comes from, and so there's an incentive to do this. When you talk about loading, and you don't necessarily don't go back to the map. I'm just talking generally speaking. When you're talking about loading, and you did outline areas which are not currently developed, but might potentially be developed, might not necessarily be close to an existing sewage facility or processing facility. And most of that looked like it was sort of in the periphery of the north part of our area and then some to the west. That brought to mind a question that came up last meeting from Director Gracia regarding potential impacts to the basin as related to large capacity or large warehouse and distribution centers, et cetera. How does something like that figure in later on into the model?
So what I will say is that right now we're looking at the available information.
Right.
We don't necessarily know if a parcel is going to be developed. So let's actually go back to that map just so we can take a look at the areas that we've identified as loading sources currently. Okay. So again, based on information that we know about, based on residential areas and whatnot, parcels that would likely be on septic if they were ever developed, maybe they already are developed. This plan is really meant to be a management plan for the basin moving forward. So the purpose of assigning water quality objectives for each zone is to give us a mechanism to manage that zone. And that really applies across the board. So what this does is moving forward, we are keeping track of those concentrations, right? We have these forecasted numbers. We have our mitigation strategies or our management strategies in place if needed. So we know if we get to a point in the future where that threshold is exceeded or where it looks like we're going to exceed it, we have a plan in place, right? And that's really the purpose of this. So let's say we're talking about the Mission Creek Subbasin north of the 10. That's a basin, if it remains its own GMZ, we'll have that plan in place. We'll know what we're going to do if we get to this point, if we start to see concentrations go up, because again, we've got monitoring wells scattered throughout the basin. You saw that on that dot map, right? And that's the point, is to really be able to keep track of what's happening. And I think I'll allude to the groundwater monitoring program where that's concerned, because we have a very large list of wells in the shallow aquifer, in the deep aquifer, in the perched aquifer zone that we sample on a regular basis. So it's a minimum of once every 3 years. A lot of those wells are sampled annually for other reasons. So if they're sampled, the information is provided as part of that plan. And it really keeps us updated as to what's happening moving forward. But having this final plan that's approved by the regional board will give us that mechanism to manage things as needed in the future. So if things are built on septic tanks and we start to see concentrations go up and we say, hey, we're getting close to this threshold concentration, we've already got a plan in place for that specific zone to manage.
Similarly, you could see changes on the eastern side of the India sub-basin when farmland is taken out of production, for example, and becomes urban or urbanized, in the same, almost the reverse of what we're talking about on the west side, if you will. So would these models then be run like, after the report is approved? Would you continue to use those models? Is that working here somehow?
And I can follow up with more specific information on that for you from our consulting team. But the purpose of running this model and developing those scenarios is to find something that works based on what we know, and identify those water quality objectives. So for the east end of the valley, where it's mostly agriculture right now, you're probably going to see a different set of numbers than you might see for the west end of the valley. If it changes over time, if it, converts from agricultural to urban for some reason, what that's going to ultimately affect is the quality, right? We're not necessarily applying water to the land for irrigation anymore, and maybe not canal water anymore, right? Now you're doing a drinking water system, right? That is piped to everybody's residences. So again, the whole point of this plan is to develop those objectives, develop those management strategies for individual zones so that if conditions change over time, we have something in place. So we know what we're going to do, what we're going to implement if needed, if we start to see those numbers go up. But in terms of whether or not we'll rerun models and whatnot, I could certainly ask that question for you.
Okay, thank you. It looks like Director Grasha has an additional question.
The issue that I wanted to point out is that, we have later on in the agenda an issue with a well that tested, non-detect, boop, out of service after the next test. That's how quick this can turn. I assume that, the monitoring process is a way to know that, someday we're going to have a problem, but what it leaves out is how awful it can be for a community. Where I live, a result of the testing of the water, the chromium from chromium-6, to be able to repair that water and to bring those wells back in service, my water bill where I live currently is running about $60,000 a year. And to fix the water and make it drinkable will go to over $120,000 a year just for one RV park, trailer park. And so the future for that we're looking at in reality is very bleak. If you live in a single-family residential home in Mission Springs Water District, you're looking at a doubling of your water bill. Might not seem to go from, say, from $80 to $160, but when you've got water systems that use a lot of water, all of that has to be brought to safe levels, and we're shrinking so fast in the number of wells that are producing real quality water that I'm not sure how long we can continue pretending that we're going to be able to suppress that number in the future. I don't think we are. You know, when you well, that's from
I think you're going in a direction that doesn't have to do with the topic on the agenda.
Well, it's
it doesn't
all-
have to do with the topic on the agenda. I'd like to stick to that topic that Ms. Rapola is here to address. So thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. 8B, a discussion item on Desert Water Agency Energy Resilience Plan RFP. Mr. Johnson, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Director Ortega and members of the board. So this is an item that was spearheaded. Director McKenna asked that the agency look at, we were calling it net zero energy plan. We've kind of reevaluated that and have developed what we are calling now the energy resiliency plan. And this is, we were asked to develop an RFP, and we have developed a draft. And this is a discussion item regarding that RFP draft that we have put together. So at this time, we'll just do an overview, just the purpose of the of what the RFP is for, and then some key dates and scope of work that is associated in the RFP. So the RFP that we put together is for the Energy Resilience Plan. It is to identify the short and long-term projects and strategies. We have asked that the consultants look at local generation and energy storage, which would be what's considered a short term. And also long-term would be something like a microgrid or a energy independent island. And this plan is that the ERP is to be a document that will be a concise document with options on energy resilience. They are going to evaluate our current energy demands at the agencies. You know, how much power do we need at our well sites and so forth, our booster sites. Evaluate the feasibility and also relative costs for projects, and then recommend best options for the agency. For scope of work, we put in different tasks in this RFP. And for our first task, of course, is the literature review and explore the regional hazards. And this is a task that basically is what it says. It's to look at and to identify regional instabilities that could occur in the valley, and then develop databases and table of contents and identify that research. Then you're going to have task 2, which are goals and objectives. Again, that's to develop our goals and objectives to frame visions for the agency regarding energy resilience. Task 3 is the Energy Board of Directors Committee meetings. So what we are proposing that the agency develop an ad hoc Energy Resiliency Plan Committee. And the consultant would then meet with this group. What we are proposing 5 meetings and go through the process. And eventually they will, at task 8, present their final energy resiliency plan. Task 4 is a vulnerability strategy. I have a tough time with that word, but this will identify climate impacts to the sub-region, identify the communities, the people, the operations, and how that'll affect the economies. It will look at potential impacts and identify critical thresholds and assets and potential impacts regarding climate change, and things such as PSPSs, which are public safety power shutoffs, and how that will potentially affect. Then we'll ask to develop an adaptation strategy. Again, this is a report that will prioritize adaptation needs. The consultant is asked to identify which impacts and threats require action, identify strategies, and to evaluate these priorities, and then to phase how these priorities would be implemented. We're also asking that the consultant look at the human resource aspect. Basically, how will this affect the agency as far as staffing and things of that nature? Then, as part of this task, we are asking for a case study, and that will just go into more greater detail. For task 6, it's develop a financial plan for the project. Of course, they're going to identify projects and how these projects fiscally impact the agency. Task 7 is then to develop a draft energy resilience plan. They'll meet with that committee, take the feedback, and then in task 8, they will prepare their final ERP and present that to the board. And so there's some key dates that we're looking at. Today is March 4th. I put that in as the date of issuance. That can always change, but we would be looking at a deadline to submit an intent by March 18th. Then consultants can submit their questions by April 1st. Our responses would be required by April 11th. And then proposal submissions deadline would be May 13th. We would then go to the executive committee for approval of a consultant by May 29th, notification by June 2nd, and then ultimately board approval of a contract by June 17th, and with an estimated project start date of July 1st. And that is kind of a high-level view of what we've been working on, and be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Director Grasha, do you have questions?
Probably a lot of questions, but I can only think of one right now. And one of the things that I had suggested that we try to work with Coachella Valley Water District to acquire the land that we're renting from the Bureau of Land Management. And one of the reasons in the back of my mind at the time was that someday maybe we could, use that that excess land that's not being used, about 300 acres, as I recall, for a solar field. But we don't own that land. I'm not interested in building on rented land, and but I know that it's been put in the system to be part of the future to try to acquire that land. I don't know where, I don't want to build solar um, systems at well sites. It just interferes with the whole idea. I don't know where else you do it without acquiring the real estate to put up a substantial solar farm. I don't know how you move forward with something like this, but I would like to know if CVWD would be interested if we were able to acquire that land to let us borrow some of it for the purpose of a solar field, and maybe they might even wish to participate. But this is a lot of work to do without having a place to put a system like this, or at least the basic minimum part of a plan. So, I think you have to adopt a little bit of a baseline, or part of this would have to be budgeting, coming up with an estimate for how much it would cost to acquire land that we don't have or might someday have.
That would be part of their evaluation, is to determine a specific type of projects, which would be a large type grid. What would the cost be associated with that? That would be a task that would be addressed in this resiliency plan,
Okay.
RFP plan.
Good. That's what was weighing on me. I'm like, well, where would you put such a thing? So, good to hear. Thanks.
Director McKenna.
I had to resist the impulse to stand up and cheer. I'm really delighted to see this get rolling. I'm impressed by how much thought has already gone into it. It combines the idea of microgrids and solar power in a really beautiful way. So I've got my fingers crossed that proposals will come in. I suspect they will show us not spending money, but saving money. The dynamics of the solar industry are incredible. It's explosive. It's beyond explosive, really. Where we put them, think out of the box. I tell people I don't have a box. We have 2 wells next to the CV link. What about a mile in each direction of solar shade structures? 6 panels on top of each one. And there's lots of places, lots of different ways this can be done. So don't imagine, you got to have acres and acres of solar power all in one spot. But I'm delighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Bloomer.
I don't have any questions. I look forward to seeing what they come back with and what the proposals look like.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Vice President Bowman.
I agree with Director McKenna. This is exciting. And I also agree that, and maybe you've already got it in some of the verbiage, that the goal is to save money, not to spend it. I mean, we have to spend it to save it. I understand that. But that if we commission in our RFP, we want to save money as a top bullet point, I think we can get it. I'm impressed with your schedule, and I think it's very aggressive in a good way. So thank you.
And Director Bowman, the goals and objectives, that would be one of the goals, is how do we save money on this?
All right, and I have nothing else to add, so we can move to item 9, which is Secretary Treasurer's report.
Okay, so these are the financial highlights for January 2025. In the operating fund, we received $3,608,756 in water sales revenue receipts, $69,625 in recycled water sales revenue receipts, $43,500 in construction deposits from 3 different builders, $61,647 included in miscellaneous receipts from turf removal grant, $39,330 miscellaneous receipts from an AMI grant, and $20,954 in receipts from a FEMA grant for Tropical Storm Hillary. We paid 4.2 million in accounts payable. Year-to-date, our water sales are 9% over budget and 13%, total revenue, sorry, are 13% over budget, and total expenses are 11% under budget. In the operating fund continued, our active potable water accounts are 23,658 for January 2025 compared to 23,648 in December. So we increased 10 accounts, active accounts. And also, there were 44 water accounts turned off for non-payment in January. Over the past 12 months, an average of 29 accounts per month turned off for non-payment, which equates to 1.5% of our customers. In the general fund, we received $14,106,376 in property taxes, $591,604 in replenishment assessments, and that was all from private pumpers. $2,833 in power sales from Southern California's Edison for Whitewater Hydro. And we paid $3,751,117 in state water project charges, and that brings our year-to-date total to $15.5 million. Wastewater fund, $118,098 in wastewater revenue receipts, and we paid $101,844 in accounts payable. There were 22,247 active sewer accounts billed in January of 2025 compared to 2,241 in December of 2024. Which is a decrease of 6 sewer accounts. And that completes my report. If anybody has any questions.
Any questions?
No questions, thank you.
All right. Oh, thank you. All right, we can move to item 10, which is the general manager's report. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, President Ortega. For the first item, just wanted to inform the board regarding the ITP, which is incidental take permit for the Delta Conveyance Project. So on Friday, February 14th, DWR announced the issuance of an ITP, and that is a very important document. It's a milestone in the planning process and advancing that DCP to closer to being implemented. So that's great news. Then the next item is State Water Project allocation update. On the 25th of February, DWR announced our allocation to 35%. And there's a statement that I put here from Jennifer Pierre, the general manager for the State Water Contractors, and I wanted to highlight one of the sentences she said, that had the DCP been in place this year, an additional 700,000 acre-feet of water could have been captured, resulting in 50 to 55% allocation. That just is a very powerful statement to demonstrate how important that DCP is. For Desert Water Agency, a 35% allocation allocates to 19,513 acre-feet. If we were at 50%, that would be a 27,875 acre-feet. So that would be an additional 8,000 or so acre-feet of water. Next, we have the Sites Project Authority. This is an update on that project, a construction procurement process. So the authority is in a phase for a construction manager at risk, or a CMAR. And this type of method is a type of innovative project delivery in which a construction manager or contractor oversees the subcontractors, assumes project risk, and is responsible for a guaranteed maximum price. So earlier this month, potential contractors were invited to tour the project, and the authority's evaluation committee will be reviewing proposals and conduct interviews to select a CMAR by fall of 2025. Another important milestone for that project. Then just regarding sites for the next report here, the Trump administration did release federal funding. It was previously allocated through the Bureau of Reclamation to the sites project. It was released, and again, just another important milestone for that project. For my next item here, I'd like to invite Sarah Rapola up and have her just give some highlights regarding this topic. So,
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Members of the board. Every year, or not every year, I'm sorry, every 5 years, the California Department of Water Resources requires every urban water supplier that either provides over 3,000 acre-feet of water annually or serves more than 3,000 connections to submit an urban water management plan. Now, these plans support suppliers' long-term planning efforts, as well as ensuring there's sufficient water supplies for both existing and future demands. You can submit an individual plan, or you can collaborate with agencies, as we do with a lot of our other efforts, to submit a regional urban water management plan. In 2021, CVWD, Coachella Water Authority, Desert Water Agency, India Water Authority, Mission Springs Water District, and Myoma Dunes Mutual Water Company, collectively regional agencies, did decide that we were going to collaborate, and we were going to prepare and submit the 2020 Coachella Valley Regional Urban Water Management Plan. This was the first time that we collaborated on a regional plan as agencies. We submitted this plan by the July 1st, 2021 deadline. As I said, this is every 5 years, so the next plan is due by July 1 of 2026. So again, just looking to kickstart that effort. We have agreed to once again collaborate on a regional plan. There's a big cost savings here because you're using one consultant amongst everybody instead of putting together your own individual plan. The CVWD issued a request for proposal for preparation and submission of this regional plan back in January. We did receive one proposal from Todd Groundwater and Rincon Consultants for preparation of this regional plan in February. And the total not to exceed cost for their proposal was $226,810. Based on the agreed upon cost share amongst those agency, Desert Water's portion of this cost is expected to be around $32,000 and change. Work on this effort for the 2025 regional plan is expected to begin in April of this year, and the final plan would be due by July 1 of 2026, as I said. DWR, every time they do a 5-year update, they submit a guidebook that's meant to help agencies prepare these plans. So we do expect to see that 2025 guidebook released about a year before the due date, so sometime around July of this year. CVWD will administer the contract with Todd Groundwater and Rincon Consultants, and they'll prepare a letter of agreement to be signed by each of those regional agencies that I mentioned. So I would open it up to any questions that you might have.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Okay.
I have a question.
Of course.
Oh, go ahead.
So this went out to bid, and you had 2 responses?
We had one response.
Oh, was it Todd Groundwater?
So they
They're coordinating?
coordinating,
Okay.
exactly, thank you.
All right.
So they are acting as a consultant team, if you will.
And they didn't bid on our other one that was $1 million? Did they?
They are actually, Todd Grandwater is the consultant working on a Sigma effort in the Indio subbasins.
Hmm.
Rincon is part of the consultant team for both subbasins. So it's actually kind of a good thing because they're working on the effort in Indio and Mission Creek. Very familiar with the data, and we're actually able to utilize a lot of the data that's being developed in those efforts for this plan.
I just
So there's a
pointing,
cost savings there as well because we're able to leverage some of the data.
just pointing out the contrast in the two numbers. The other one is what? 3 times more money? I suppose it's more complicated, but the work, again, the work was already done. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
All right, anybody
Think-
else
yeah,
before
yeah,
we move forward?
we'll keep going here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So the next item, I'm going to invite Ryan Mulhook up here to discuss for the Cross Connection Control Policy Handbook.
Are you outsourcing everything from your
Uh,
meeting today?
I felt it was important on these subjects.
retirement
since
planning.
Staff is heavily entrenched in these, and I feel staff should get in front of the board. The board should be introduced to them and get to know them. And so
I wasn't really being serious.
I know I'm delegating,
All right.
but
Thank you.
so go ahead, Ryan.
And I'm certainly happy to be here to present this to you this morning. So what I am going to go over is just kind of some highlights of where we are with the Cross Connection Control Policy Handbook, in particular the plan. So this Cross Connection Control Policy Handbook was adopted by the State Water Resources Control Board at the end of 2023 and became effective July 1st of 24. Essentially what it is a new standards or updated standards for cross-connection control and backflow prevention. It kind of replaces all the previous standards of the state. Some of them, are basically copy and paste, but updated and new ones. One of the requirements of that new policy is to submit a plan for how we are going to comply with that policy to the state. And that plan needs to be submitted by July 1st of this year. So back when the policy became effective, we started reaching out to consultants to find out if they can assist us with this type of plan, who does these plans. Kind of in general in the state, since it was a new thing, everybody was kind of scrambling, trying to figure out how to accomplish this. So we went through that process, and we ultimately selected West Yos and signed a contract with them to help us prepare that plan for $59,500. We're in the process of doing data collection, had several progress meetings with them, and just yesterday afternoon in my inbox, I got a technical memorandum, which was kind of the first deliverable for them. That's going to identify kind of what we're doing, how it compares with what the new policy requires us to do, and any shortfalls or kind of next steps we need to do to address that policy. And then from there, kind of develop that plan to submit to the state. We anticipate that these new requirements are likely going to require additional resources on our end, both human and otherwise, but this planning process with West Yos will help kind of narrow that down and understand the magnitude of what we're talking about. And we have also been reaching out to other agencies, kind of look over the fence what everybody else is doing. We recently attended Coachella Valley Water Agency group last Wednesday, the first meeting, to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, how we're addressing this, our plans somewhat consistent. And then ultimately, once we get there, is our messaging and our education and our outreach and all that kind of, online with the rest of the agencies in the valley. So again, we're in that first kind of the early stages of developing the plan with that technical memorandum. We'll review that, give our comments back to the consultant, and kind of start to hone in the plan from there. And as that process develops, we'll certainly be bringing you some more information on where we're at. But just kind of want to bring it to your attention that it's out there and we're working on it, and it's coming to a theater near us. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Well, I just, this has come up and this was the third time I've heard this report from two other water agencies and then today. And I understand that this is not likely to affect, I don't know if I want to say this or not, older properties that aren't, if they're not, these are for homes that are on fire, have fire sprinklers, or have you been able to get into it that deep to understand this? part
So
of it?
I do know what you're referring to, and there's some language in the policy that I'll say is ambiguous.
Okay.
And really, quite frankly, a lot of the agencies that we've, kind of shared with are kind of scratching their head as well.
Okay.
But exactly what the requirements will be, we're still working through that process.
Oh, okay.
But ultimately, the goal of the new policy is just to try and be a little more diligent or proactive on the backflow as a
Right.
whole. Everybody kind of has their own strategies on how to address it, and the state's attempting to kind of bring everybody in line with that. Yet understanding that every agency is a little bit different, so that's why we propose a plan to them, and they say yay or nay.
So this part was part of the concerns with the Catino project, the cross connection between the recycled water and the potable water supply that they've got going throughout that whole property now. And this is, in that case, would be to make it impossible, is that right, for that to happen. And as I understand it, well, we'll have to wait and see. I don't want to, but it sounded like in older homes and older neighborhoods that don't have that issue, or unless they had fire sprinklers, that it might not be as, not every parcel might not have to do this, I guess, is that?
So from our early primary understanding, loosely, is, this is really focusing on commercial and industrial and those types of uses, and some of the recycled water customers, that sort of thing, where it's a lot
Good.
more straightforward.
Right.
The residential side of thing is, I'll say, kind of to be determined at this
Okay.
moment.
Yeah, okay, I'm satisfied, and I thank you. It's an interesting process that we're going to start here, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. For most of our customers, might luckily be, fingers crossed, not have to go through this.
Okay. Director McKenna, do you have anything?
Yeah, years ago, I came across a cross-connection issue. At the Hyperion sewage treatment plant in Los Angeles, I was on a job walk, and they had signs in all the restrooms saying, "Do not drink the water because we have a cross connection somewhere between the high pressure effluent line and the potable water," and they couldn't find it. It took them years to find it. But I'm wondering, where are we at risk for cross connection? We don't have high pressure wastewater system. We're not. Where does this issue really arise?
So there's really quite a few, I'll term it, possible areas in general, and that's where you get involved and have specially trained people to go on and identify these potential hazards, and then put in the proper protection, the backflow devices to protect against that. And we do that for Desert Water Agency sites as well. For example, here we have reclaimed water that serves irrigation, and then we have potable that serves in theory, that could be cross connection, but we inspect that annually and do tests to verify that they're not cross connected based on pressure and other things like that the specialists know how to identify and use the equipment to identify all that. So.
Correct. Secretary Treasurer Bloomer, no? Vice President Bowman, anything?
My first encounter with cross connection was when I bought our hotel in '03, and I look out in my parking lot, and there's an MSWD truck, and I'm going, well, what are they doing here? And they were coming to test our backflow device to make sure that our little hotel wasn't kicking back water that might have been or hurt or from our hotel. And so that was my first introduction. So I'm assuming we test, or do we have a company that goes out to all the various hotels here in Palm Springs to test their backflows?
We test every backflow that's in our system annually.
Great, yeah, I figured such. Thank you.
Okay, I have nothing else, so
Okay.
unless you do.
No,
All right,
nothing additional.
Thanks, Ryan.
The next staff
Yeah,
reference
all
comes up.
right. All right, this one, I'll take this one. Our
Okay.
customer dispute policy evaluation. Again, this was, I don't know if it was the last meeting or the previous meeting before that. There was an appeal by an individual, and there was a discussion by the board regarding our current policy on how we handle disputes. And the board asked management to take a review of our process and to see if we can improve or make some changes. So we have looked at that. And what we have done is we've created a internal document that is an additional step to our current dispute procedures. And this is something that we are calling our high bill assistance program procedures. And what this will do is it will update our existing guidelines. It'll also provide more flexibility, and it expands the program to non-low income customers. If you recall, our previous procedures where a dispute comes in, we evaluate it, and if we've determined that our equipment was working correctly, we sent a letter saying our equipment's working properly, and if you're a low-income person, here's some help. And that was kind of the gist of the letter. So what we're doing now is we've added this high bill assistance program procedures. Again, this deals with if a customer calls and disputes a high bill due to high consumption, we will continue to go through our process that we are currently doing. We'll investigate the accuracy of the meters and determine if that meter is working properly. And if it is, then what staff will then do at that point is now turn to this high bill assistance program. This program is, the funding source will be from non-rate revenue. For low-income customers, what the program allows is for staff to grant a credit up to $300 per account in a 2-year period. Of course, if the customer meets qualifications. So for qualifications, must be a low-income water service customer, must have received a high consumption bill as a result of a water leak, and also proof of water leak repair provided to the agency. If there's any variances, the general manager can evaluate that. For non-low-income customers, the general manager may grant a one-time credit for water consumption in excess of normal consumption over the past 3 years for the property. That's something new. Both low-income and non-low-income customers must have received a high consumption bill, which is 2.5 times the normal use as a result of water leak, and show proof the water leak has been repaired. Of course, if the customer is not satisfied with the results of the high bill assistance program, the customer may submit an appeal to the board. This was the high bill assistance program procedures was presented to the executive committee at the February 25th, 2025 meeting, and the committee just asked that I do a general manager's report to introduce it to the rest of the board. Okay, then, so the next item, I've asked Paul Monroy. Yes, go ahead, Kristen.
One question.
Ms.
So-
Director Bloomer.
So this is for the low-income customers, it is in addition to what they can apply to through the Help to Others at United Way. So they can still do that regardless if we give them a credit?
Yes, that's correct. So the Help to Others program is how we verify that they are low income. So that is
Okay.
one of how they qualify for the low income credit. So within a 2-year period from that point in time, looking back, if they had applied for and received, so therefore verifying that they are in fact low income, so they then can qualify for DWAs up to $300, of course.
For a high bill only?
For a high bill only, and the high bill is defined as 2.5 times that normal use. And additionally, but so if they had applied for it, let's say a year ago and had received it, then of course for the high bill, we're only talking about DWA would only pitch in that $300. But if they hadn't, and in response to their high bill, they applied for it and received, then you're talking about a maximum of $500. But DWA's contribution is limited to only the amount over normal consumption.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. For this next item, I've asked our lab director, Paul Monroy, to give an overview of the report.
I don't recognize him. He doesn't have a white jacket on.
I know.
Same thing. Who are you?
Thank you, Steve, and members of the board. So in the end of last quarter, in 2024, the state asked us to start monitoring for PFAS. PFAS has been kind of a buzzword in the media for the last couple of years, and many have referred to it as a forever chemical. So PFAS, short summary, it's perfluoroalkyl substances. We see this kind of throughout many chemicals used for various household products. And California, trying to determine where we can see this contamination throughout the state, has required all of the water agencies to test in the next year for all of their wells, all of their standby wells. So we did it in October. We were one of the first agencies to volunteer to do this analysis. And the results came back where none of our wells, except for one, exceeded what they called the Consumer Confidence Report limits. So for well 26, we did have a hit for PFOS, which is perfluorooctane sulfonic acid. And then we also had a hit for perfluorooctanoic acid. That was below the CCRDL, but we did have a hit of 5.5 for PFOS. That has a CCRDL of 4 with the notification level of 6.5. So the difference between these different levels, the CCRDL just requires us to monitor going forward. So we're going to have to monitor quarterly and then include this into our consumer confidence report for the year. The notification level would have indicated that we would have immediately had to notify the public of the exceedance within 30 days of receiving the results. And then the response level essentially is we would have to stop production in the well, remediate it, and we wouldn't be able to activate it again until it was up below the levels required. So currently our order will be for us to monitor quarterly, and if we get 2 quarters in a row where the level is below the CCRDL, then we can petition the state in the future to reduce that monitoring amount. Going forward, California hasn't set the MCL yet. The EPA hasn't set the MCL yet, but they are looking at an MCL of 4 parts per trillion. So this well would be above that amount. But we have essentially it was 5 years from the order, so by 2029 that we have to comply with that level. This well has been tested in the past. We monitored it in 2019 and 2020, where it did come out as non-detect for these compounds. So this hit coming up, we are in the process of investigating it and seeing where this is coming, and hopefully in the next couple of quarters of testing that we can see that it comes below the level that is required. If you guys have any questions.
Thank you. Director Gracia?
Thank you for the report, and I really appreciate the disclosure. Didn't take 15 years, didn't have to sue me 3 times, didn't have to try to put me in jail twice because I was demanding the truth.
All right. Can you just get to the question?
So I
Thank you.
appreciate how a demonstration of how easy it can be to do business.
All right. The question,
properly.
please.
So, and with that, I'm going to reserve my comments for after your next set of tests. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Director McKenna?
Where is well 26?
That was my question.
I got you.
Not allowed to ask that question.
David has a better, can kind of explain it better than me.
Well 26 is that well that had the grass around it, in that just to the east of us, in that small mobile home park, just
In Palm Springs. Whereabouts?
off of Crosley, just to the east of Crosley, off Bellardo.
All right.
There's the golf course on Bellardo and Crosley, and
Lardo doesn't go there. Baristo?
it's a different.
Barona?
It's a,
Crosby and
do you
Bellardo.
know where
Bellardo goes
King's
north-south.
School?
Yes.
King's School?
Yeah. Bolero.
Is that Bolero?
Yeah, that's
oh, I'm
Bolero.
sorry. Bolero. Okay, Bolero. If you go down Bolero to the end of Bolero,
Got it. There's a mobile home park.
small
there, yes.
mobile home park, and that's where well 26 is.
Do we have any theory about where it came from?
No, initially we had looked at this well prior to 2019, prior in 2019, where we tested it 4 times because we did have an initial hit in PFAS. And we checked it for any kind of contamination that could be from us, whether it's Teflon tape, anything within the lines of our sampling. And we tested it 4 months in a row, according to the state, and we were able to show that there was no PFAS in there. So we are not sure if it was a man-made, contamination from us, or if it's truly in the well somewhere. The levels that we're testing at are such low levels that they can come from anything, whether it's a Gore-Tex fiber that fell in the well at one point. It's something that we gotta really look at. So continuous monitoring, we'll kind of see if the well is shut down and it kind of accumulates over time, and then we test it right away. Is that the cause, or does it need continuous flushing to remove that contamination?
And this result is from October, is that right?
This was October of 2024.
Have we done any subsequent testing on that well?
Currently, the well is down.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Does it?
But we have to start in April to test that.
All right. Director Bloomer
Does-
or Secretary Treasurer Bloomer? No, nothing else? Vice President Bowman?
None from
No.
me.
So Bolero runs basically behind Target.
Behind Target. That's
Yeah,
correct.
so it's
behind-
Target. There are a couple of, there's a hotel back there. There's some rehab center back there.
About a half mile north of that.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So when you say this was tested initially when, 2019, 2020?
2019 and 2020, yes.
And is it a result of more sensitive tests possibly, that we didn't detect it before and now we are able to?
So the initial test, so there we did have an initial hit for the same compound. It was lower than the level that we looked at, and then once we removed any kind of contamination that we thought could potentially be caused by us, we tested it 4 months in a row, and we had non-detect for those 4 months. And then we tested it the next year after that, and we also got a non-detect. So having this show up again 3 years later is kind of, it could be wasn't initially, caused by us or caused by sampling procedures, but it could be caused by something else within the well.
Hmm.
That's speculation on my part.
There was news reports on this subject on that well in 2018 or 19?
It was I think they
The-
talked 20, no, well, it would have been 2020, something like that, because we did the testing at the end of 2019.
When would you feel comfortable coming back to the board to give us an update?
We'll be testing it in April, and we should be able to get results within the end of that month, so probably by the end of April.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Okay.
now what?
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. The last item is our system leak data, 14 leaks, and we have one street that has 3 leaks, Sunnyview, but that's currently that is part of a replacement project right now, and the total hours for those 14 leaks of labor was 87. We have general managers meetings, activities. Again, just highlights the tribal mediation. There was had a meeting regarding the IT department. Assistant General Manager Tate attended a Sites Reservoir Committee Authority Board meeting. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Director Grusher, do you have any questions for the general manager on his report?
We covered it all nicely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director McKenna?
None for me, thanks.
Secretary Treasurer Bloomer?
None for me.
Okay, and Vice President Bowman?
None from me.
No, and nothing else from me. So item 11 would be director's reports on meetings and events attended on behalf of the agency. We'll start with Director Grasha.
Thank you. I have, it was a busy couple of weeks, but only let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 meetings, I think. So on the 29th, the 19th and the 20th of February, I attended the California, let me read it. I got a certificate. The California Water Security Summit. And it was put on by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and by the time that was over, I almost jokingly say, now I understand why the general manager is so serious all the time. There's a lot to understand when it comes to that level of concern that a person has to have over his agency. It was very well done and probably should be put on a list of, you have to actually go through a background check, so not everybody might be interested in doing that. But if you're up to going through the process, it's very, very enlightening, and anyone that's certainly new to a board like this would do well to spend a couple days. That's put on by the, it was at the Metropolitan Water District headquarters, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation and their InfraGard, which I guess is having to do with the cyber security department, and they're protecting water systems from physical attack and natural disasters. It was very interesting. Anyway, on the 24th, the Luskin Center at UCLA held a aqua-sponsored forum on the subject of water supply and the Los Angeles fires. And I will reserve my thoughts on that. I think the Luskin Center's in for a big surprise. Anyway, on the 25th, Coachella Valley Water District Board meeting, headline, CVWD drove a stake in the heart of further testing on stannous chloride, declared it to be a failure. I think we did that here 2 years ago. And I'm glad to say that that's over with. And now we're on to, following on the remarks of Joaquin Escoval, who spoke at one of the forums at our Urban Water Institute Forum, which was on the 22nd to the 28th, reiterating his position, the state's position, that there will be no letting off of the boot off the neck of those districts that have issues with the chromium-6. And it appears that the federal government will not be providing funding for agencies in California that are to meet state state rules, if you will. I've gone over the financial effects of that. These decisions are all coming together at one time. I wanted to thank our Ms. Sines for her presentation at the Mission Springs Water District Board a few weeks ago. I was able to catch it on YouTube. Extraordinary job. I wish we had that available to us when I was elected on that board. Might to them be a little hard to take, but to be able to have that level of detail provided, contradicting so many statements that come from various interests in Desert Hot Springs, I think is truly enlightening, and will at some point in the future begin to allow people to understand that there's important business being done by this agency for the people of Desert Hot Springs, regardless of what is said by certain quarters over there. And with that, I thank you, and that's it.
Thank you. Director McKenna.
Since our last meeting, I attended Mission Springs Water District Board meeting on the 18th, same day as our meeting. I went to Desert Hot Springs City Council, also same day. And then went to Washington for the Aqua DC conference. During that visit, we met with staff from Senator Schiff's office, Representative Calvert and his staff, Senator Padilla's staff, the House National Resources Committee, minority staff, Representative Reese and staff, the House National Resources Committee, majority staff, and we did nothing else really. So, if you thought the federal government and Congress was a little dysfunctional before, you wouldn't believe how dysfunctional it is now. I mean, the phrase we heard most of all at every meeting was, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, over and over and over. These agencies, departments are clueless now about what their future is. And the people who work there, or at least one I had a private meeting with, you know, the entire executive staff of his agency have taken that resignation offer and gone. So it's just amazing how much destruction can be done in just a few weeks. I'll just leave it at that. So that's my report.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Bloomer.
I attended a tribal mediation meeting on February 19th, and then I was also in Washington, D.C. the 24th through the 28th, and was in all the same meetings. I will say there was, since we were talking about PFAS and PFOA today, Senator Schiff had a special conference for about 30 minutes and asked people to stand up and say what their main issues were. And there were a lot of agencies around Southern California that have much bigger issues with PFAS and have very expensive projects and mitigation they're going to have to do coming down. And they were all asking the federal government for funding. So that was interesting. And same like Director McKenna, it was very much, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen and what we can help you with, but we made sure to outline our priorities and asked about a community project funding as well. So all in all, I think the meetings went really well, and all of our points were taken, and so hopefully we will get some support on some of them. And that's it.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
Yes, on the 19th, I too was part of the tribal mediation, the principals group. On the 20th, President Ortega and myself met with President Ivan Sewell, and sadly, Vice President Robert Griffith couldn't meet for our little gathering of talking and building bridges between MSWD and DWA, and it was a very productive meeting. On the 25th, the executive committee meeting. And then I had the privilege of attending on the 26th and 27th, the GMDA conference. And I have to say, most of the people there are ag people. And I learned a lot from them. Their challenges are somewhat similar to ours, especially if they're pulling from an aquifer. And the contamination issues, the challenges that they face. I learned, this might be a duh for everybody in the room but me, but when you're flying over the country and you see those circles of green, that's a pivot watering. I didn't realize that the center of that pivot is a well. And that there are places, I think Saudi Arabia had started digging, doing pivot well, and then all of a sudden their aquifer's gone because it just sucks the water up. And I found it very fascinating. There was discussion about the corners of those that some of the farmers have tried and have successfully gotten water to go into those little corners to percolate into the ground to help their aquifer. Anyway, that's just a little tidbit that I picked up that I did not know. Oh, they also talked about Sigma, and they were doing a Sigma type product within themselves long before we here in California fired it up, and I thought that was interesting. But the most exciting thing of this whole conference was going to the Diamond Valley Lake. That lake is, it has 800,000 acre feet of capacity, which is more than Lake Havasu, which is only 648,000. We had a docent from Metropolitan whose name was Greg Windman, and he was absolutely fantastic. He was born and raised in that location, which is the Hemet area, and he knew what was happening. He saw Diamond Valley Lake, which started construction in 91 and ended in 99. It's the last water thing that has happened in California that's actually gotten built and done until hopefully sites. They took us on the tour of the, how can I describe it? The pumping station had 9 levels. We had to walk down to probably, I guess would be level 1, which would be water level, which by the way, Diamond Valley Lake is completely full. There's no lack of water for that, thankfully. And from that first level, it went down another 8 for a total of 9 levels, so that if the water level drops, they can continue to pump out of Diamond Valley Lake. There's a 21-mile public access walking or bicycle or e-biking road around Diamond Valley Lake. I can't wait to do it. It struck me as a wonderful bit of engineering in that all the material that they used to create the dams was harvested right there. Nothing was brought in, saving all kinds of money to Met. And let's see what other notes I have on that. I was excited, as you can see. I can't wait to go to the one coming up next month. Thank you, this month. And that's, let me see, that would be it.
Thank you. So I attended a couple of outside meetings. The first would be, as Vice President Bowman has already mentioned, on the 20th, the Mission Springs Water District and Desert Water Agency Ad Hoc Executive Committee. And what we talked about, a couple of things that are of note for this board. One is we discussed the potential, as Ms. Rapola in great detail went through today, about the salt and nutrient management plan in terms of how that would affect or what effects we might see on the west side of the valley as it relates to future development and in particular their treatment plant. And we also talked about the presentation that was made to their board by Director Sines, and President Sewell was very thankful to have that opportunity again to ask questions. I came away from that meeting feeling that he was quite satisfied with the result. And so thank you, staff, for a job well done. I also then attended from the 26th to the 28th, the Urban Water Institute conference, which was last week. There were several notable presentations and discussions, a lot of it related to ag and Sigma, which I found kind of interesting given that it's an urban water institute, but there was quite a bit of focus on ag and the Central Valley, which I think is important for us to know about. And the first presentation was by Dr. Gregory Pierce from the Luskin Center. And that, again, as Director Grasha noted in a previous event that he participated in on wildfires, water supply, and the worst-case scenarios related to the Los Angeles fires, or using the Los Angeles fires as sort of an example of things to look for in future wildfire-related events, and also to help dispel some of the misinformation that came immediately out of that fire period in the Palisades in particular, related to hydrants and reservoirs. I think the other thing that I found really interesting, where there was a presentation on Sigma, and one of the slides showed all the basins in California that are falling under Sigma, and they were color-coded. And not to anyone's surprise, perhaps those that were color-coded red, which were those in serious situations in terms of lowered aquifers, seem to be primarily located in the Central Valley, and those that seem to be quite healthy were primarily located in Southern California, which I found interesting. And a little bit, it was a somewhat heartening graphic to look at, considering that we're right in the middle of that. And then finally, there was a sort of on Friday morning, there was I would call it a legislative update, if you will. There was a presenter looking at what's happening in Washington and with the federal government at the moment, and making some predictions about what might be expected in the future as it relates to how impacts to California water agencies. Again, at the state level, similar sort of summary from the state level. And then finally, we ended with Chair Esquivel from the State Water Resources Control Board. I felt it was a little bit contentious. There were some sort of raised voices, I would say, in the room, perhaps slightly unwarranted. but nonetheless a little bit uncomfortable, having to do with these recent rain events and the lack of the large amount of water, of course, going out through the delta and into the ocean, and how some of that could have been captured and perhaps transported to the Central Valley, where it could have gone into some storage or groundwater storage. But in any case, I felt this was probably one of the better of the Urban Water Institute programs I've been to in a while. I thought all the presenters were quite well versed in their topic. So I was grateful to be able to do that. And with that, we can move to the final item on our agenda related to the public meeting, which would be director's comments. And we'll start with Director Gracia.
I have no comment. I think I had made that one comment at the end of my report.
Okay.
So
Director
sorry to mix
McKenna.
those together. Thanks.
A few thoughts from Washington. Cybersecurity was a big issue. We had a briefing from the FBI. And I know we're doing a lot of work on that here, but it was just amazing how vulnerable so many, small water systems are. There were, and in the United States generally, there were 180,000 ransomware attacks in 2023. And it's just mind-bending, the size of the numbers. Also discovered that the Bureau of Reclamation is fully behind sites. That money is getting released, even though a lot of other money is frozen. That money is not frozen. So I was delighted to see that. You talked about debris removal in Los Angeles. The Corps of Engineers expects to spend $3.5 billion on debris removal from the 2 Los Angeles fires. The numbers are just amazing. How we really have to harden our infrastructure, including our own houses, against this new climate that we live in. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Treasurer Bloomer?
No comments or requests, thanks.
All right. Vice President Bowman?
Yes, I referenced when my wife and I moved to the desert in '03 and opened up our hotel. We were watching TV beginning of '04, and one of the local news channels said, oh, and by the way, it was sort of an afterthought, Mission Springs Water District just got a gold medal in water tasting from the Berkeley Springs International Water Tasting Test. And then the commentator, the news person, kind of had a puzzled look on their face. And that struck me because, we were pumping hot mineral water from our well, our own personal well, and we were drinking some amazing water. I want to give a shout out now to MSWD because they got another medal here in 2025. They got a bronze, and that makes their medal count 3 golds, 4 silver, and 4 bronze. And in case you're wondering, is this a significant event? It really is. Metropolitan Water District participates in it. That's how significant it is. And they have gotten 10 awards, and then MSWD has got 11. So anyway, I appreciate the water, and I appreciate the work that MSWD does to provide that to our customers, their customers.
The water's been determined to be unsafe for human
well,
consumption.
It's
in
not
the
your
entire
turn.
area
It's
you're
not your
talking about.
turn. It's not your turn. Thank you.
And I will comment, Director Gracia, as we gather with that district, your comments impede any kind of cooperation that we may have. And I would appreciate, I'm talking right now.
Not your turn.
I would appreciate that you would keep some of these to yourself because MSWD, CVWD, DWA, all the water districts in this valley work together. As we heard today, they're all, the staffs are on various salt nutrient management plans, SIGMA. If there's a problem that a district has, it's not our job to pick on it. It's our job to help and to figure out things. So it would be nice if you would keep these thoughts to yourself because we're all in this valley together. We have to play well together.
Right. Thank you. And I have no further comments. It is now 20 minutes of 11. If we could meet in the boardroom for closed session in 10 minutes at 10 minutes of 11, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Welcome back to open session. I can report there was no reportable actions taken during closed session, and we can now adjourn today's meeting a little after 12. Thank you all very much.